think the big difference in the past was if you signed up for cryopreservation, you needed to be a cryonaut, whatever the cryonicist. Like now it is your personality.
Right.
I'm exaggerating a bit, but maybe not too much even. Now it is your personality that you are involved in that cryopreservation thing. So we try to move this field into, you do whatever you want to do, but and you might like whatever, you're a doctor, you're a computer scientist, it does not matter. You just think if I die tomorrow, I'd rather be cryopreservation. But there's no that you don't need to sign up to a larger framework of thought or whatever. It's just something that you do. And I think we're going into that direction and trying to communicate the topic in a way where it is acceptable to a larger audience, and then make sure that people are just saying, hey, this makes sense to me, and then it's easy to sign up, it's easy, it's not a hassle, and so on.
This episode of Levity is brought to you by Vitalism Foundation. It's a community of action driven by Vitalism, a new moral philosophy whose first tenet is that life and health are good, death is humanity's core problem, and aging its primary agent. They're one of the few groups that truly understand aging as the emergency that it is.
Vitalism's goal is nothing short of monumental: to allocate 1% of global GDP to this project. It's ambitious, but it's exactly what's needed to tackle aging head-on.
As a member of Vitalism, you'll get access to a private community, exclusive content, and invites to special conferences. Plus, you'll receive insider prices on longevity wellness services from Vitalism's mission-aligned partners.
But more than that, you will be supporting a mission that's too important to leave to others to tackle.
You should really join us. Follow the link in the description below. For a limited time, you get 30% off forever. Just use the promo code LEVITY at checkout.
Again, that's 30% off forever with the promo code LEVITY. Let's make a difference together.
Emil Kendziorra, welcome to Levity.
Thanks for having me.
We met at the Longevity Biotech Fellowship retreat in Sweden back in January.
Right.
And I think I listened to you talk about cryopreservation for like 2 or 3 hours in total. And it's just so endlessly fascinating topic, this. And you're also very good at communicating every aspect of this field. And so I just felt then and there that if not all the people in the world can listen to this, then we should at least try to have as many as possible to hear you talk about cryonics. This is what we're going to discuss today: what cryopreservation is and how it works, and some of the history behind it, where the science is today, and the big hurdles that we have to overcome. I think we're also going to spend some time on the more existential and philosophical side of cryopreservation, the borderlands between life and death, and maybe what it would be like for a cryopreserved person to wake up again. And then also, yeah, and then also we have the logistical side of it. What's the best way to die, so to speak, and to ensure the best cryopreservation, and what happens to a body during the first hours and days, and how it's being transported and where it's being stored. But before we get to any of that, maybe we should talk a little bit about your background, because today you are the CEO of Tomorrow Bio, and you are in the business of cryopreserving people, among other things. But from what I understand, you graduated with the highest honors from a leading medical university in Germany. So how do you go from that to having one of the most unusual roles or companies in the world?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's quite the other way around almost. Like I studied medicine to do longevity things. So this was always the plan, right? That's why I went into med school. Then during med school, I went into cancer research because this was the original plan of mine. Like, do an MD, then do a PhD, and then lead an aging, longevity, life extension, however you want to call it, research institute down the line. And then during med school, I more and more felt like academic research doesn't move at a fast enough pace. And then that's kind of where my standard plan path kind of deviated, and how I ended up where I am right now. So after med school, so longevity was still my plan, right? Like I didn't leave academia because now I fundamentally changed what I wanted to do. But during the last years of med school and then after, I didn't really feel like there's anything where I felt like it has high enough impact to do longevity. And when I say longevity, right, I primarily, at least personally, mean living healthy, but also living longer. Right now, of course, there's kind of the split between health span, living healthy, and then lifespan, living longer. So my personal motivation was always both. And since there's less research in lifespan, I said, okay, I'll focus on lifespan. So then I started a few tech companies, not because I primarily wanted to do tech companies, but because I didn't know what else to do, and it felt like a good way to make money. And then after selling my last two of those, I started a cryopreservation business because I've been looking at this field now for almost 20 years or so, and while progress is being made, I don't feel like progress is even remotely fast enough. So I said, let's work on the backup. On the backup.
We can maybe get back to why you don't feel that progress isn't fast enough, but maybe we should start with just getting a firm footing here. So, what is cryopreservation? And there are all these other concepts around it, like biostasis and cryonics. Uh, can we sort of sort those out before we begin in earnest?
Yeah, sure. So pretty much they're all the same thing, right? So think of biostasis as the umbrella term. Biostasis, right? This whole topic is pretty much a bridging technology. It's a technology that bridges, depending on how old you into the future, so that once all these life extending technologies that we hope will arise at some point in the future, you are still there and not cremated or buried. So biostasis is the umbrella term. And now there's different types of or different methodologies how you can reach biostasis, right? One is cryopreservation or cryonics. Cryonics pretty much is the word that is being used for human cryopreservation. And then there's other types of or other methodologies how you can reach biostasis, which would be, for example, chemical fixation or other types. But by and large, from a value proposition standpoint, all of these words, at least if they're applied to humans, mean the same thing. You preserve your body so that your body and your brain and your, as much as we understand, identity and personality and memories are still around in the future once all this technology that we're looking for has been achieved.
How does cryopreservation work? I think we will get into it in a lot more detail later on, but just from an overview perspective.
Yeah. So in very simple terms, the logic is that if your brain, meaning the connections in your brain, everything that we currently understand makes you and makes me. So personality, identity, memories, as long as that stuff, the physical basis of that is being kept around, you, for all intents and purposes, might be revivable in the future. Now, in cryopreservation, how you keep that around is by reducing the temperature extremely low to at least negative 140 degrees Celsius, at which temperature there's no aging, there's no degradation, nothing happens anymore. And you do that without freezing, right? So I know that colloquially the topic is always called freezing people, but in fact, it's quite the opposite. We do a lot of stuff to not freeze anything. Yeah, and with these low temperatures, you can then bridge that time. And cryopreservation is the technology that allows you to cool down a body to these negative 140 or even lower temperatures without having ice crystals form, with the least possible amount of damage, and then maintaining that temperature so that someone can be brought back in the future, at least tentatively.
I think the freezing part is something that people have a hard time understanding, but that has to do with not damaging cells, right?
Yeah, so freezing historically, when the idea of cryo or like human preservation came about, right, in the 1970s and so on, back then it was freezing people. You just cooled down, ice crystals formed everywhere, and so on. And ice crystals, for a variety of reasons, are very damaging to the tissue. Not the least that because they're just sharp, like they puncture cells and so on and destroy to a certain degree, or at least damage, maybe not destroy, but damage the structure. Now, cryopreservation, how it is done right now, is not freezing. It is, and the reason for that is because freezing means water, right? It means water ice crystallization, and the crystals grow and so on. But during the cryopreservation procedure, and of course I'm happy to elaborate how exactly it works, you replace all the water in the blood in the body against a so-called cryoprotective agent, which is, in simple terms, a medical grade antifreeze. It's a solution that even at these very, very low temperatures does not freeze. It in fact cannot freeze under certain circumstances at least, which allows you then to go in what is called a vitrified state. It's like a glass-like amorphous state that has no ice crystal form.
You mentioned the beginnings in the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
How did the idea of cryonics take hold? From what I understand, it originated with Professor Robert Ettinger and his book, The
Yeah,
Prospect of Immortality, and it was released in 1962, I believe.
at least from a recent standpoint, right, or like a recent in quotation marks, the idea of preserving yourself, right, and then potentially waking up in the future is much, much older. Like, in fact, Benjamin Franklin had in one of his letters this idea of, you keep the body. Of course, it wasn't like technologically the idea was different, but it was the same fundamental idea. You keep your body, and then maybe with future technology, the body can be revived and you can be revived. But in recent history, yes, the early 1970s was when this idea, in quotation marks, took hold. Even though, again, back then it wasn't cryopreservation, it was just freezing. But you kept your body around, and then with the hope and the plan that in the future, with sufficiently advanced technology, whatever damage happened and whatever led to the person's death can be cured, and yeah, the person can be resuscitated and live on.
The first person who was preserved with, I guess, these uh, now ancient technologies like using freezing
Right,
was James Bedford, right?
right, yeah. Like, so
So it would be a
this is not a,
challenge to reanimate him in the future.
yeah. So likely, as much as we currently think, cryopreservation revival will be a last in, first out principle. So
Yeah.
the person who has been cryopreserved with the best technology, there will be the least amount of damage. There will be the best understanding of what actually needs to be preserved and how it needs to be preserved, so that they can be brought back first. And then probably the person who has been preserved first will be among the last who will be preserved. Um, and I think that's likely how it will go.
Yeah. So where are we with the science today? I mean, first of all, maybe we should just address the elephant in the room that some people would like to call this a pseudoscience or just plain science fiction, that it's just never going to materialize. What's your How do you respond to that? I guess you are very familiar with that kind of view.
Yeah, to be fair, I think this view is mostly a view of the English-speaking Wikipedia, or some admin of the English-speaking Wikipedia. It's not so. So when we started out building this organization that does so, I had a crisis communication agency on retainer, because we thought we need to constantly fight and have these fights.
Yeah.
That has not materialized at all. So there is a significantly higher. I mean, there are people out there who say it's not for me. I don't want to do it, but that's totally fine. But the idea that people feel like this is not scientific, or it should not be done, and yada yada yada, is a significantly smaller percentage than it might sometimes seem to be, right? So there's whenever I give interviews, like the journalists, they try to find someone who like gives a counter, like I don't know, who has the critiquing positions. And there's like this couple of doctors and some scientists who it's always the same people who are being called up to speak against it. And unfortunately, most of them have a very they have a very outdated understanding of how cryopreservation is done, how the procedures work, and so on. So a lot of people, for example, say, "Yeah, but it's freezing. You know, how do you fix all these ice crystals?" And then, of course, how these discussions always go: I say something, the critique person says something, but I never have a chance to respond again because the article is now already published. So um, unfortunately, it's not really a discussion that is being done. I'm more than happy to take a panel discussion with any of these people whenever they want to. So, but coming back to the critique. So cryopreservation absolutely has some open questions, right? So informed consent, making sure that the people know what they're signing up for, is highly important. But then again, most Western countries have concepts, even in medicine, like compassionate use, right? If the alternative is death, if the person otherwise would be cremated or buried, doctors and patients, with informed consent, of course, can try, under certain regulations, can try unapproved medication and so on, right? Because again, the alternative is death. And then from a scientific standpoint, I mean, cryopreservation is clearly using the scientific method, right? It's testable. You can show that certain types of cryopreservation work, right? It's falsifiable, and so on. The only, and I think this is usually what trips people up, the research experiment is just a bit longer than like maybe normal, right? So maybe cryopreservation until it might work will take like 40 years, right? Until it can be figured out if it works, right? But then again, there is no. It doesn't say anywhere a research experiment can only be a certain length, right? So I think usually these critiques are usually slightly less informed than maybe they should. And I'm the first to say that there's a lot of stuff in cryopreservation that needs to be improved and so on. But from a fundamental standpoint, um, it's clearly science.
It sounds like it's the taboo again against the longevity that's operating here.
It is, I think, yeah, to a degree. I think there's, and even with cryopreservation, I think there's even maybe a stronger initial gut reaction, right? Like, keeping people who are dead right now around and then maybe reviving them in the future. To a degree, I understand this gut reaction to a bit, but then again, and this is usually how it goes. So when I speak at these conferences, right, I go to a lot of longevity conferences where there's relatively, mainstream researchers in the audience, right? And over the last couple of times when I was there and spoke about cryopreservation, multiple people who had then discussed at dinner after that, like, listen, I've never thought about this topic. I only stayed at my gut reaction level, and I felt like, hey, I don't want to have anything to do with it. But if you then talk to these people or present or like frame this topic in a way that is maybe slightly more acceptable, then a lot of people are like, listen, I don't really have a good argument. If someone with informed consent says I want to do this, then I feel like there aren't really that many good arguments why that person shouldn't have the right to do that, and at the same time why there should be research dollars put into that direction, because we need to remember, right, there's a tremendous amount of people. It's not only the 80 and 90-year-olds who are cryopreserved. There's a lot of people who get cancer and at 40. In fact, most of the people who are cryopreserved with us now died significantly earlier than life expectancy, right, due to cancer, due to ALS, due to a range of diseases, where who are we to say that these people who died with 40 should not have the opportunity to live longer?
There was this a teenager, a girl. I think she was 14, a couple of years
Yeah,
back.
it's a famous case in the UK where someone very young had a terminal condition, And then, if I remember correctly, a part of their family, like one of the parents, felt like cryopreservation is not something we should do. The other person felt like this is something, that at least they would support. And the person themselves, the child, said, "I want to do this." And then a relatively high up court in the UK decided it is their right. And then the cryopreservation was done in the end. And again, like I feel like even though there are open questions, I feel like the counter argument that someone should not be allowed to do that is significantly more difficult to support than saying, listen, if it's someone's choice and after having weighed all the pros and cons and so on, then of course it is their right.
Yeah.
It's illegal in France, right?
It's not illegal in France. So I know that this is it's a bit of an urban legend for whatever reason. So I think it's partially stems from that in France in the past, someone, I don't know, kept their parents in a freezer in the basement or something like that. Which, yes, of course, that's illegal, right? It's also illegal in Europe, in Germany, or in any other country, right? Maybe not in any other country, but in most other countries, right? So all in all, it's not illegal in France either. In fact, I'm not aware of any country. I mean, there's probably some country in the world, but in all Western countries that I'm aware of, it is not illegal. There are certain regulations that need to be adhered to. So there needs to be a body donation contract, right? It should be done at a research organization, and so on and so on. But as long as you adhere to these things, it is also fine in France. At least you can definitely cryopreserve and bring the cryopreserved body to another country where you do long-term storage.
So where are we with the science today, comparing to 50 years ago?
So comparing to 50 years, it's not even the same thing, right? Back then it was literally freezing. Now there's cryopreservation. So significant progress, like fundamental paradigm shifts have been made since then. Now, within the space of cryopreservation, so since cryopreservation is done in humans, which is around the early 2000s, since then, a lot has been shown that can be cryopreserved and in fact can be brought back. Right, you can revive small model organisms in the lab. Right, you bring them back, they keep their memories. It's a small worm, so memories is always in quotation marks in this case. But it is neural structure that is it's neurally encoded structure that is at least fundamentally similar-ish maybe to humans, even though I don't want to say that that means human preservation will work anytime soon, or human revival will work anytime soon. You can preserve small organs, right? You can bring them back, you can transplant them back into animals, and the animals with that cryopreserved organs lives on, and so on. It was just a recent Nature paper a couple of years ago that showed that again in rat kidneys. You can show that the neural structure in the brain keeps the parts that, as much as we understand, makes up memories and identity and personality and so on. So there's all these building blocks that show that cryopreservation in principle might make sense. And of course, I think it definitely makes sense. What you cannot yet do is cryopreserve and then resuscitate humans or large mammals. And in fact, currently you cannot do any mammal for a variety of reasons, mostly related to how big mammals are and how big humans are. A lot works, but oh yeah, and one more thing, sorry. One more thing, you can show that you can put people into cryopreservation with high quality and keep them in cryopreservation without a lot of the damage happening under good circumstance, at least. What you cannot yet, you cannot take them out.
Can I ask you, what is the largest animal, organism, or organ that you have successfully cryopreserved and also resuscitated? Oh.
On whole organism, it is C. elegans. It does not necessarily mean that it wouldn't work for a larger animal. So a lot of stuff in cryopreservation, it's a very underfunded field. So a lot of stuff that where I currently can't say it works, it's not so that it has been tried with like millions in research years and so on. There's a lot of stuff that just has not been tried. So it might in fact work. It might in fact be possible that larger mammals, larger organisms, or maybe even small mammals might be possible if significant research money would be put into it. And then on an organ side, kidneys is the most prominent research organ that is being used. And the largest are rat and rabbit kidneys, like kind of this size. So relatively small, that can be fully preserved and then brought back.
Speaking about cryopreserving mammals and then resuscitate them, I think there's at least some interesting proofs of concepts. I'm thinking about the Swedish woman Anna Bågenholm. She's actually from Vänersborg, which is very
Oh,
close
really?
to my hometown. Yeah.
Awesome.
Can you tell me about her case and why it's so interesting in this context?
Yeah. So this is a case. It's a case report from a woman that during a skiing accident fell into a river, didn't have a heartbeat, so clinically dead, right? Didn't have a heartbeat, and then due to the water flowing around her, like this ice water, this ice river, she cooled down very fast, right? And that person was then found, if I'm not mistaken, about an hour after not having had a heartbeat. So she didn't have a heartbeat for an hour, was found, and then resuscitated. So chest compressions, all the normal stuff that you would do. And after some rehabilitation, she lives now. She lives happily ever after, right? So she came back. She had no neurological, no physical, you know, long-term effects. She lost her short-term memory, but not much more. And the reason is so even though of course it's fundamentally something different than cryopreservation, it shows the fundamental logic of cryopreservation. There's the saying in medicine that says you're only dead if you're warm and dead. And
Right.
that's exactly what happens here. The reason why people die when their heartbeat stops is because then the brain is not supplied with oxygen anymore. And the cells now start an active, it's almost like an active recycling process on a cellular level. But this process is dependent on how fast the metabolism runs. So it's an active process. Now, and this is exactly what happened here. Due to the cooling down, this active recycling process goes slower and slower. Now, normally, right, when should my heart stop here now, then the EMTs and so on and doctors would have around 8 minutes to resuscitate me. Otherwise, too much degradation, too much recycling has happened. But if I cool down, this length of how long the body can sustain itself without oxygen goes longer and longer. And now, as you can see, with relatively small degrees of cooling, you can already extend it to an hour about. And you can also go longer, but in this case, it was an hour. And now cryopreservation, of course, puts that concept to the extreme. And now if you cool down further and further, you can extend that period much longer, and at cryogenic temperatures, you can do hundreds of thousands of years. Hopefully it doesn't take that long, but if need be, so that's at least that's not going to be an issue.
What are you most impressed about when you hear a case like Anna Bågenholm, or when you hear about reviving roundworms? What gives you the biggest hope that we're actually going to make progress on this and hopefully be able to do this in the future?
So there's a couple of reasons. So one is I'm not aware of anything that should make cryopreservation fundamentally not possible, right? Like everything how I understand, and of course we don't fully understand this, but how the brain works and all of that, nothing is fundamentally less. Sure, there might be engineering problems and there needs to be improvement, but fundamentally I don't think there's anything that doesn't allow it. Then there's constantly progress being made. But on a high level, I think the strongest argument is the strongest argument I think is medical history, and in fact all history of technological improvements. There was always things that we could in the past have not imagined. Then they became science. Then they became day-to-day practice, and then they were accepted as okay, sure, this is how it is. When I grew up, iPhones were unimaginable when I was a child, right? For some people, when they grew up, planes, traveling by plane to a vacation across the Atlantic was unimaginable. Um, and it's not so much that um, these things were just like, yeah, we need to get slightly bigger, nicer screens, right? When I was a child, or like maybe a couple years before that, iPhones were fundamentally unimaginable, right? And so and I think I'm pretty sure that if we would have that conversation like 50 years from now, we would say exactly the same, that 50 years ago these things, like things that are now totally day-to-day practice, are unimaginable. And I'm not I just don't see why cryopreservation should be different here. And then last but not least, I also don't know if I get cancer tomorrow or some incurable disease where the doctors tell me I have 6 months to live, like, my choice is between cremation or burial and cryopreservation. And I'm absolutely sure that if that is my choice, I'm going to choose cryopreservation. So it's also kind of like, what's the alternative, right?
Yeah.
If I would have all these other great ideas, then I would maybe work on them. But I think for the time being, cryopreservation is the best bet.
You talk about this in a recent study, that like the information theory of death or something like that, that we maybe shouldn't think of people as dead before we can actually say that there's no hope of retrieve the information that made their identity, so to speak.
Yeah, I think so. I would slightly rephrase it to, I think we should not consider them irrecoverable dead, right? I mean, today, for all intents and purposes, they are dead, right? They're legally dead, they're clinically dead, they're dead. Like, there's no metabolic activity, there's no consciousness, and so on. But that doesn't mean that they're irrecoverably in that state, right?
Yeah.
And again, going to history, there was a time in the 1960s where before that time, no one did chest compressions. CPR was not a thing. So CPR has not been done since the 1700s, right? It's a relative recent thing where in the 1950s, if someone's heart stopped, people were like, okay, that's it. Now it's medical malpractice if you don't do CPR, right? So even in that and for all intents and purposes, on the old definition, CPR is bringing back people from the dead, right? In the 1950s, 1940s, whatever, people would have said, well, this person is dead. That's it, right? And then at some point, people figured out, well, there might be dead right now, don't have a heartbeat, no consciousness, but if you do CPR, they're not irrecoverably be dead, right? And then now we have this point that, yeah, they're not irrecoverably be dead, and they're not irrecoverably dead if they have been longer than a couple of minutes dead, but they're cooled, right? And now again, cryopreservation might be very well similar to that, as long as the part that makes you, the memories, the identity, and the personality, and as much as you understand, right, it's the connections in the brain, it's the weight of these connections, it's how the individual cells work, like what kind of computation they do, computation in quotation marks. Um, as long as these parts are still there, then you might not be irrecoverably dead. And now, how recovery exactly works is currently conceptual, right? Like, this has not been tried in humans, but it might very well work at some point.
When we were at the Longevity Biotech Fellowship retreat in Sweden, uh, the organizers, they presented uh, a few different paths for us to reach unlimited lifespans. And I think that I'm probably not wrong when I say that most people would prefer the advanced engineering path, where we actually solve it without having to die first, or maybe even the replacement path, where
And
we
I
don't
agree
solve
even.
it. Yeah, so a lot of people, because biostasis was, of course, one of the paths discussed there, and but a lot of people hope that this is a plan B that we never have to do. But you are of the opinion, and I think that maybe you wouldn't have started tomorrow, and you alluded to it in the beginning of our conversation here, if you thought that we were going to solve this problem within our lifetimes. But how come you are skeptical of that?
Yeah. So first of all, don't get me wrong. I do not want to be cryopreserved. I'd much rather take the pill or the treatment or whatever it might be, right, and then just live happily ever after. And I don't want to speak for them, but I think even they in their kind of roadmap, in their kind of like priorities, they made cryopreservation now the main one. Like this is now priority one, not because someone wants to do it, but because people are dying every day, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I'm working for that is it has a couple of reasons. So first of all, I think the likelihood that we're going to figure out how to live longer anytime soon is very unlikely. The reason for that is multifold. So on a high level, so I come from cancer research, as like that was my background. Um, the cancer research field has been saying it's just another 10 years for the last about 40 years, right? There's always, and of course I understand this to a degree. There's always this hype going on where then a new thing comes out, and you always feel like it's around the corner. And of course, one of the good examples here is when we sequence the genome. The medical community thought now we're going to solve every disease because now we have the blueprint. And then, of course, it turned out it's a bit more difficult. So I have a hard time seeing why the longevity enthusiasm that we have right now and the optimism, why are we so fundamentally more correct in our prediction than every generation and every researcher in the last decades was before us? And of course, we have now AI and big data and so on. But every time in the past, they also thought, now we have that, now we have this, now we have the genome sequenced, right? And it always turned out to be more complex. And the other reason is from a kind of from a functional standpoint, testing longevity interventions is very, very tough because you would at some point you need to run clinical trials where the endpoint is like maximum lifespan, right? And now if there's any disease, anything that you need, or any treatment that you need to give to someone who's 70, and then you need to test how long they live, well, you need to now do 20 something years of follow-up or whatever, right, to see if maximum lifespan is actually increased. So very difficult to test. And then last but not least, if I'm wrong, I just take the pill. In 20 years down the line, I just take the pill, I do the treatment, and I say, yeah, okay, sure. I at least personally wouldn't have needed to do cryopreservation. But if I'm right, I want to make damn sure that I'm not 85, dying of cancer, and there's no good cryopreservation around. And then lastly, every additional dollar and every additional person working on cryopreservation, since it's such a small field, has significantly more personal impact than if I would run another whatever partial reprogramming company or whatever. So like I know that this is the cryopreservation value proposition is a bit more of an acquired taste, right? You need to kind of wrap your head around it. You need to think about it in a bit more maybe logical way and so on. But I think I think there's multiple reasons why it's easier to work on any other longevity intervention, but it's the right thing to work on cryopreservation.
I have this idea that the reason why there's not enough research and funding in this field is because what I said earlier, that people think that it's pseudoscience or just plain impossible. But maybe that's not true. Maybe that my intuition there is false. But it's
Yeah.
still underfunded. It's there's still a lot more research need to be done and a lot more funding that needs to come in. So how should we change that?
Yeah, so in the past there was this field being slightly non-scientific was true like 20, 30 years ago, right? And it was exaggerated or like even made worse by communication in the past of some proponents of cryopreservation being very aggressive, like stuff that I would never say, and also don't believe, like where you kind of generate this us against them kind of mentality, which usually doesn't help if you want to build larger communities and so on. I think the main reason why cryopreservation is so underfunded is because, if I work on longevity, and then, I might not make longevity, I might not make it there, but I find something that, I don't know, that rejuvenates the skin or can be used as a cancer treatment. I'm going to make a lot of money. Even though I might not have reached my goal, at least I have made a lot of money. And in cryopreservation, that's a bit less clear. Either it works and you can bring humans back. I mean, the one exception would be organ biobanking after cryopreservation, but that's a pretty big challenge as well. So I think at first sight, the other treatments, other research areas just look better. They're easier to fund. They give you more mainstream reputation, right? More people want to work at it. More people are excited about it. Again, cryopreservation is a bit of an acquired taste. The interesting thing is that a lot of people who in the past have started out as longevity researchers are more and more switching to cryopreservation. So very well-known people, I mean, even Aubrey de Grey, right? I mean, I'm not saying he's fully switched over, but he does stuff in cryopreservation now, right? There's a couple of other people who now have started cryopreservation organization. Joe Pedro Magalhaes, right? Big longevity researcher, has started to do things in cryopreservation with Oxford Cryotechnology, right? So
we had Alexandra Stolzing on the podcast recently as well.
Yeah, she as well,
this.
right? And she was VP of research at Sense, right? So people, there's this, and I know a good amount more with whom I have handshake agreements, that at some point, when they turn 60 or 50 or whatever age they want to pick, they're going to switch over. When they feel like now we might already be too old. So I think there's a multitude of reasons. The reasons why I'm going on these podcasts and speaking at events, or one of the reasons, right, is exactly that, advocating for the topic. And basically the goal here is that people come out of this topic and say, listen, I should actually think about this once. I should not let my gut reaction tell me, I'm happy already doing whatever other research or however people are involved. But no, let me think about this if this actually makes sense. And then if someone wants to get into the field or wants to support it financially, I mean, we're always happy to talk, right? Like and see how people can get involved. And usually so far, everybody who reached out, we found some way of how they can meaningfully get involved, right? So I think it's just a slow grind of making this topic more, making people more aware of it, and kind of triggering them to think about it once from a more fundamental, with a bit more thought.
Hearing about longevity researchers switching to cryonics is a bit disconcerting, I have to admit.
I think it's a very it's a very good thing. Yeah. And the reason, of course, if I would believe that we have a shot, right? If I would believe we have a shot of making it, then I would say, yeah, maybe that's the problem. But I think the likelihood that we're gonna make the cutoff, where now we just live however long we want because we now have reached longevity escape velocity, I think the probability of that is so low that I'd rather optimize for making sure that we have good cryopreservation, and then allow people who are interested in the value proposition, in the idea of living as long as they want to, get good cryopreservation, and then basically give these people enough time so that the rest of the medical field figures out longevity. Because my contention is not that longevity, living longer, doesn't work. My contention is just that we might all already be too old to make it to the point when the field has figured it out.
I read that DARPA was doing biostasis. Is this something that helps you in any way?
It helps me from a branding standpoint, like because DARPA is involved and so on. But if we talk about what they actually did, so DARPA was interested more in what they called suspended animation, which is more akin to hibernation, or like not even that, but just basically what they were interested in long story short is, let's say someone gets shot on a battlefield, right, and is bleeding out. Now, can we cool them down on site and then bridge the time until we bring them to a field hospital? So basically support or like reduce the metabolic load by cooling to bring them to a field hospital and then have them operated on, right? Which, again, it's the same fundamental logic that we employ with cryopreservation. But from a research perspective, some things are directly usable, like this initial cooling is also something we do. But then cryopreservation has a a long list of unique problems that they would not have.
For full disclosure, I have signed up with Tomorrow Bio.
Oh, awesome. Good.
That's something that maybe listeners and viewers should know in this conversation. But um, I do think that um, it would be maybe it would be a good idea for us to use me as an example going forward in this discussion. So we're going to talk about what happens to my body in the future when if I'm going to be cryopreserved. But first of all, maybe we should let people understand a little bit more about the process right now. So how do you sign up? What alternatives do you have when you live in different parts of the world and so on? And I think a lot of people, of course, one of the first things they think about is, isn't this very expensive?
Mhm. Yeah. So we as Tomorrow Bio, we accept signups in Europe and in the US. So the reason for that is here we have medical teams. In the US we have medical teams, right? So cryopreservation is partially logistics. So if someone lives in Asia, it's very tough for us to pick that person up if need be. Now, the process works from a sign up perspective, works kind of in three big steps. So you go to our webpage, right? Tomorrow.bio, you click sign up. You now just sign up as a member initially, right? Meaning credit card information, personal information, email, telephone number, and so on. Then, when you've signed up, you get a cryopreservation contract. This is the main contract that basically states if you die, you would like to be cryopreserved, and for that, you donate your body to us. Cryopreservation, legally speaking, is a donation to research or science. Depends a bit on which country you're in, but by and large, it's a donation to science. So, and then of course the contract states that we're not doing like the cryopreservation itself is the only experiment, right? Now, the last part is this funding. Right? Cryopreservation indeed currently is relatively expensive. The reason for that is that so few people currently do cryopreservation. It's growing tremendously, but it's still in absolute terms not that super big. And then most people who sign up with us are somewhere between 35 and 45 maybe. So luckily they're not dying anytime soon. So very few people do it. Now, funding in most cases is funded via insurance. So we have a large life insurance partner that if you sign up with us, you can choose to take out life insurance. We are the beneficiary of that life insurance policy. So should you die, the life insurance pays out and that money is being used for cryopreservation. Now, the amount of coverage for that life insurance contract should be 200,000 euros. So that's what cryopreservation costs right now. My hope is that in the future it will be less, but then inflation is also happening, right? So maybe the 200,000 euros inflation adjusted in 2024 euros would be what is required in the future. And to take out a life insurance contract for 200,000 euros coverage, depending on how old you are and how healthy you are, is maybe in the ballpark of 30 to 50 euros a month. Can be higher, can be lower. It depends, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. And then you pay your life insurance and you pay a membership fee with us. And then altogether, people come out somewhere between 60 and 100 euros a month. So it costs some money, but it is, if people want to do it, it's very manageable, right? And then hopefully we're not going to see you for a very long time, but our teams are always ready. So if something happens to you, now you're fully signed up, now you're fully funded, and should something, I don't know, you get cancer, whatever happens that way you might die, we send one of our teams.
From what I understand, you recommend the concept of term life insurance, and that is a type of insurance that you have for
Yeah,
a period of time, and
yeah.
then afterwards, I think for me it's in 2047 or something like that. So should I die after that period of time, then I should have saved money, right, to be able to fund the process at that point.
Yeah, to go a bit more into detail, so we have different types of insurance as well, or the insurance partner has different types of insurance. But term life insurance has the big advantage. It has two big advantages. One, if you sign up today and the insurance company accepts your application, then should you die next week, you're already fully protected. One big advantage. The other big advantage is it's easy to sign up for. It's very relatively affordable, so you can do it. You can do it easily. The downside of it is, in fact, indeed, that it has an end date. So term life insurance runs out at some point. You can extend it, but it still has some end date. The reason why we suggest to start with term life insurance, right? Term life insurance protects you right now, and then there's two factors. Let's say you have term life insurance for 30 years ballpark. Then in that 30 years, two effects can take place. We can work on making it cheaper. It's one of the three main goals of the company: make it better, make it quality wise, make it more accessible, and make it cheaper. So the hope would be that in the future, cryopreservation can already be offered at a significantly lower cost. And usually, as I said, people sign up with us when they're somewhere between 35 and 45. Usually people who are 70 have significantly more personal net worth than someone who's 35. So the best way how to think about it is sign up with term life insurance, put some money on a monthly basis aside, put it in the stock market, right? Very long investment horizon, and then work your life, make the money, and then hopefully cryopreservation in the future is already significantly cheaper, or at least not more expensive from an inflation adjusted standpoint. And then pay it at that point out of pocket. Now, around 20 years about before term life insurance runs out, we're going to reach out, or we're reaching out to our customers and tell them, hey, think about how would you fund it when your term life insurance contract runs out, right? And the idea is now that they have like 20 years to kind of think about it and make sure that they've done any investments and so on. So that's kind of the best way how to get started with it.
So let's now imagine my death in in different scenarios. So the
Right.
first one is pretty grim. So I'm in a plane that crashes and burns, and then it's pretty much game over, right?
Yes.
It shouldn't be
Yeah.
retrievable in any sense.
No, like so in like really plane crash over the Atlantic and so on, that's one of the rare cases. Normally the rule is cryopreservation is done no matter what. But plane crash over the Atlantic is one of the examples where, yes, in this case, it might not work. The positive thing is that like plane crash over the Atlantic, like happen almost never. I'm not sure if there's any has ever happened over the Atlantic, at least not in recent aviation history, right? So while this is theoretically something where, yes, in those cases, cryopreservation cannot be done, the likelihood of you being that one that dies like that is negligible to none. And if it happens, then you can tell us what should happen to the money. So no fall, no like we're not keeping the money in that case, of course. If the cryopreservation is not being done, then you can decide what happens with that money.
Let's say there's no time for tomorrow to actually make any plans for my death. It is sudden and surprising, and it happens in Sweden, where I live. What do you do, and what happens?
Yeah. So in these last minute cases, like a range of different things we do to make the cryopreservation happen as soon as possible. So first, let's say you die in Sweden, right? We send one of our teams by car on the way. Doesn't matter day or night, 24/7 we're starting. If it's during the day and there's a flight that lands in Sweden quicker than the car would arrive, then the ambulance would arrive. We send one team with a so-called flight kit, meaning they can do the whole procedure on site when they arrive with the equipment that they brought by plane. At the same time, we reach out to in most European countries, maybe even in all of them by now, we have local volunteer teams. they might not be fully ready to do the whole procedure, but at least they can do the initial cooling, right? So we're actively still training them, right? So to make them better and better. So if there's a team close by, we would reach out to them and ask them, hey, can you do the initial cooling so that we gain time to do the rest of the cryopreservation procedure. And last but not least, we're reaching out to the doctors in the hospital where you probably will have died, if they can do initial steps. That sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't. It really depends. But all of these things happen at the same time so that the chance that you get a good cryopreservation is maximized as much as possible.
So I just want to stay on that for a little while. I guess the logistics of this has been improving a lot, and that's something that you have been thinking about hard, how to manage those sudden deaths, the unexpected ones.
And even those statistically are less likely, right? The most common death is you know that you're going to die and so on, but nevertheless, they still might happen. So currently what we're doing kind of a threefold strategy. So one is having more professional teams. So currently we're building different ambulance teams all over Europe, right? In Berlin, in Zurich, and so on. The second point is we have flight kits that can always be taken on a plane, and then teams can be sent to whatever European country within a couple of hours. And then last but not least, we're training these local teams. And local teams, they're usually volunteers. Sometimes they're doctors even, but they're not like employed at Tomorrow Bio. And they are there to bridge the time until a professional team arrives. So pretty much what they do is cooling and chest compressions and giving oxygen and so on to, as we discussed before, to keep the brain from self-recycling, or the cells in the brain from self-recycling, and due to this cooling, extend the time until the next procedure that needs to be done. And now this will be an ongoing thing. So if you ask me in 10 years, I will say yes, we're still improving logistics, right? And then it will be more, and hopefully at that point there's like 50 teams or 100 teams. But this will be an ever improving network and coverage map of medical and cryopreservation teams that, if need be, are available at a moment's notice.
Do you see any hurdles here? Is it easy to collaborate with hospitals, for example?
So it's currently almost impossible to collaborate with the
Yeah.
hospital. It's not so much even that they don't want. It's not the issue. The issue is that, so in Europe, there's currently around, let's say, 10 cryopreservation cases per year, right? Might be a few more. It's big variance, but ballpark. Now, in any random hospital, even if it's a big hospital, right, the probability of there being more than one cryopreservation case per year is already pretty low. So how can you make a partnership with someone when you say, well, no, we partner now, and then that might not happen for the next 5 years, right? There is no meaningful partnership to be generated, even though they might be very interested. So we know some hospitals that are very open to it, right? But there is nothing meaningful to do together. So down the line, that might change, but for the time being, we're just looking for doctors who we know that they're, from a personality standpoint, they're supportive of it, but from a partner perspective, there is currently nothing to be done.
And those small units of people are on standby, trying to be ready to help if something happens. So they're kind of standby then all year round, and they've signed up for this in a way.
Yeah. So we have two types of or three types of standby, right? One is we have a team here that is on demand, and in fact, we have three teams here that are just in Berlin or whatever, somewhere, that they're on demand, can be brought to any location that they need to be, right? The second type of what we call standby is if someone is in a hospital and they know that they're going to die within the next couple of days, then we bring a team. We already dispatched a team, so the team waits on site, and then is of course there without any delay if something happens. And then last but not least, we have these volunteer teams, right? they're technically not committing to anything. They just commit to, be called should something happens, and then hopefully they're willing to jump in. And of course, we pay for that, of course. But in the meantime, the rest of the year, apart from joining some trainings, they don't have any obligations.
Okay. And so, if there is time to plan for my death, which probably is likely, then what is the procedure? What does the procedure look like? The days before I'm about to die, and the hours when it happens, and so on.
Yeah, so that's by far the most common case. So if we're staying with the cancer example, someone is diagnosed with cancer. The doctor tells them that it's incurable, metastasized, whatever. Then at some point, first of all, people then tell us, right? We want to know as early as possible if death might happen soonish. Now, when the doctors tell us that the person might die within the next couple of days or weeks, then we send a team early enough so that, of course, it's a probabilistic thing, but a high likelihood that we are already on site before the person dies. Unfortunately, sometimes it's difficult to predict exactly when someone's dying, right? Like some people live then significantly longer, others people die significantly faster than the doctors might have thought. But we try our best so that we send one team. The team then waits on site, of course, meets the patient, meets the doctors ideally, tries to, make sure that the doctors are at least to some degree supportive, or at least not against it, meets all the hospital staff and so on, so that if need be, when the day comes, that we know everybody and that logistically everything works as smooth as possible. And then, we wait there. We wait on site. And then the second the doctors tell us that the person is now doing really bad, and then once they're being pronounced, second after pronouncement, in an ideal case, we want to take over and start with the cryopreservation cooldown procedure.
What happens if the doctor is against it?
So, legally speaking, it's the person's choice, right? So they cannot, the doctors can be against as much as they want. Cryopreservation is still happening in the end. The risk, though, is that now, of course, you're in a hospital, right? So, there's security and so on. So the problem is not that the cryopreservation doesn't happen in the end, it's that there might be a delay. We have not met yet doctors who are really against it. We've met doctors who are not like super enthusiastic about it. And they're like, I wouldn't want to do it. But in general, doctors pretty much in all cases so far, in the end, say this was the patient's wish. That's fine by us, right? So it's possible that at some point we're going to meet doctors who are strongly against it, and that would probably cause delays. But cryopreservation is still happening.
I guess the patient has also had time to actually tell the doctor what he wants to happen.
Yeah, so that's our strong preference. That not we don't need to tell the doctors, but the patient tells them, I have made that choice for myself, right? And to be fair, now, of course, once we hear that someone might die soon, right? We're discussing with them. We're trying to understand what doctors believe, who they are, and so on, right? If we believe that there might be a high probability that the doctor is against it, right? Technically, you don't need to introduce this topic at, hey, I want to be cryopreserved to maybe be revived in the future, right? You can say, well, listen, I have decided to donate my body to science. And for the scientific research project, it's very important, it's crucial that the team that picks up from the research institute, that there's little delay, right? So there's a bit of leeway of how this topic can be introduced, but of course, our strong preference is that the doctors are at least they excited about it and maybe even supportive, which in most cases so far was the case.
Okay, so you are now in control of my body. I'm legally dead and medically and legally dead. That's the two criteria that you need, right?
Yeah, legally we need legally dead, but that's always it's medically dead and then legally dead. This is kind of how it goes.
So you are now in possession of my body. What happens?
So we start now what is called stabilization. So we want to basically stop the brain cells from degrading. And we do that by cooling, by supplying the body again with oxygen, and so chest compressions and giving oxygen. As I said, we start cooling, and we give a range of medications. Some medications so that the blood doesn't clot, and other medication that are pretty much metabolic, that reduce the metabolic activity, so that there's less, the speed of, on a cellular level, degradation, recycling, dying goes slower. And then once we have cooled down enough, or initially, right, then of course everything is monitored with temperature and anti-CO2 and a large range of monitoring equipment to make sure the process is going well. Once we've done that, then before we want to cool down below 0 degrees Celsius, we want to have that cryoprotective agent in the body. Basically remove all the water and replace all the water against cryoprotective agent. Now, to do that, we cannulate the ascending aorta, so basically the large vessel coming out of the heart that supplies the whole body with blood. We cannulate that just like you would in an operation room.
What does that mean?
And then we perfuse. So when you go in open heart surgery, right, then if you want to stop the heart to operate on the heart, you want to supply the blood. You want to, of course, supply the body with blood and oxygen. What you do, you put basically, it's kind of like a plastic tube into the big vessel of the body, right? So if the heart is here, then there's a big vessel coming out of the heart, which is the aorta. Now you put this plastic tube into it on one side and put another plastic tube on the other side where the venous side is. And now in an operation room, you would just circulate the blood by a machine, by a so-called heart-lung machine that replaces the heart by pumps and the lungs by a so-called oxygenator. Now, we do exactly the same. So our ambulances have like small heart-lung machines where we, of course, in our case, don't want to circulate blood, but we want to circulate cryoprotective agent. Now, we basically pump cryoprotective agent into the body on one side and take cryoprotective agent and water and blood out on the other side. Now, we increase the concentration of cryoprotective agent slowly. And then at some point, we have reached a cryoprotective agent concentration in the body that is high enough that now all the water is replaced and no ice crystals can form anymore. And once that has happened, we can cool the body to first 0 degrees or under 0 degrees, and then initially to around -80. And at that time, we'll have, in most cases, already reached the facility in Switzerland, where we do a CT scan to make sure for quality assurance. And then we cool down the body first very fast as we can, to -120 degrees. And then from -120 degrees, we cool it very slow to the final storage temperature, which is either -140 at minimum, and in most cases currently -196.
I want to get back to why you do it very fast at first and then very slow. But first of all, tell me about this ambulance, because this is also fascinating. You're actually, because maybe it goes without saying that you're not doing this procedure in the actual hospital. You're doing it in one of your ambulances. Is that correct?
Right. So in almost all cases, we either do it at in the ambulances or we do it in Switzerland. So we have multiple of these ambulances. Right now we have 3 in Europe that are pretty much, so we buy ambulances and then we retrofit them to be mobile operating rooms. So this whole procedure can be done on site in one of these ambulances. And we do that because in most cases, if someone has died, right, then the hospital is like, our job here is done. Now do whatever you want to do, but usually it's highly unlikely that you're allowed to be able to use any hospital property, just because they have other patients that need the rooms and so on. So we transfer the body to one of our ambulances and then can do the whole procedure there.
Do you do it stationary, or do you actually travel when you do this procedure?
We do it stationary. So it's a bit more complex. So our preferred is to do it in front of the hospital, do the whole procedure, and then start driving. We can also technically initially do part of the procedure while we're driving, not this heart-lung machine procedure, but chest compressions, for example, we can do while driving. So it's a bit of a mix depending on where exactly we are and how easy it is to do stuff on site.
I think you mentioned something during the LBF retreat that you wouldn't want to be stopped by the police. I can't remember what scenario we were talking about then.
Right, I don't know either. But I mean, to be fair, no one wants to be stopped by the police, right? But you definitely don't want to be stopped, even though it's technically fine, right? So legally speaking, of course, we have all the documents that allow us to do it, but it still might generate some amount of discussion, right? Because it's not something that probably even a police car sees every day. So we would like to avoid that as much as we can, but then again, if it happens, it would also not be a nightmare.
And so now get back to this very fast cooling and then very slow cooling. Why is that important?
Mm-hmm. So normally in cryopreservation, you want to cool down as quick as possible, right? Like meaning if you cool faster, metabolic reduction goes faster. In fact, these cryoprotective agents, they work better, or in quotation marks, they kind of only work if you cool fast. So cooling fast is usually good. Now, once you have reached negative 120 degrees, at that temperature, all the metabolic activity is already reduced by so much that the fast cooling has been done. Now, at around this temperature, somewhere around negative 130, you go into you cross the so-called glass transition temperature. I said before that cryopreservation is not freezing. It is pretty much putting the body, the tissue, into a glass-like state, a glass-like amorphous state. The technical term for it is a vitrified state. So what we do is vitrification. Now, that happens around negative 130. Now, once you go into this glass-like state, the tissue in the whole body becomes a solid, like a glass. And now, since it's a solid, if you would cool this down, or if you would continue cooling it down fast, the outside would cool faster than the inside, or at least some parts would cool at different rates. And since it's glass, it's a solid, due to this cooling, you would get thermal stress because different parts, you have like a slight differential cooling. And that thermal stress might lead to what is called fracturing or cracking, where you get basically macroscopic thermal stress fractures that you want to avoid. Now, and since now you have already reached the temperature that you need, or like where like degradation is anyway stopped, to allow for cooling until the final temperature, the final storage temperature, without this thermal stress, you do the cooling very, very, very slowly. So when we store at negative 196 degrees, we do this cooling for around 100 hours. So we have these computer-controlled cooling chambers, where in Switzerland, in this case, we would already be in Switzerland, we would do the cooling, computer-controlled, very slow.
Can you elaborate a little bit on cryoprotectants? And we talked a little bit about this with Alexandra Stolzing when she was on the podcast. That they're actually toxic to you, and I know that in your recent paper, you also mentioned a few other similar methods as to how to preserve a body. Can you elaborate on those two things?
Yeah, so cryoprotective agents are pretty much solutions that do not freeze. Like no matter what temperature they are at, they do not freeze given fast enough cooling. Now, these are indeed toxic. So if you would give them at high temperatures, cells would not like that. Cells would at some point not be viable anymore. But at low temperatures, since there's no metabolic activities, these toxicity can be reduced a lot. Of course, we do a lot of things to reduce the toxicity of cryoprotective agents in the first place, but definitely cooling also reduces it. So there are other techniques of how you can preserve something. Like one quite well known is called what is called ASC, aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation,
Right.
where pretty much you do a chemical fixation first. Chemical fixation means you give a substance, usually some type of aldehyde, that cross-links all the proteins. So it basically binds them together, which then also stops all degradation. And then after you've done that, you do the cryoprotection. So you give cryoprotective agent, and then you can cool down. That is theoretically so. Under certain circumstances, we do that procedure because it allows for better preservation. But the main preservation technique is in fact cryopreservation without the chemical fixation. So I think down the line, probably this field of biostasis will move into the direction where under certain circumstances you do, preservation technique A. Under other circumstances, you do preservation technique B to always allow for the best possible preservation.
What types of circumstances could that be?
So currently, the primary one is how much time has passed between heart stops and procedures can start. Initially, which is the so-called how long is ischemia. So how long is the brain and the body not supplied with oxygen? Now, if there's a low amount of ischemia, we like to do cryopreservation. If there's a high amount, you need to switch your procedure, your approach. That would be one of the deciding factors of what kind of procedure needs to be done or should be done.
Yeah, so let's discuss storage. So I would be placed in what is called a dewar, right? What is that?
Yeah. Dewar. So the word dewar is it's a name. It's the name of the guy who invented the thing. It's pretty much a large scale stainless steel container that has a double wall, and in that wall there's a hard vacuum plus some other stuff. And due to this hard vacuum, it's extremely well insulated. So in our case, there's negative 196 degrees inside, and on the outside you can touch it and it's totally fine. It's room temperature basically, right? So these dewars are filled with liquid nitrogen at negative 196 degrees, and now the patients are stored in these dewars where you can maintain these low temperatures by just putting, so they're totally passive, no electricity needed. You just need to refill liquid nitrogen, and that you do. And then as long as you do that, then you can maintain this cryostasis for pretty much indefinite time frames.
And my body would be placed upside down.
Yeah, that's one of the, also slightly sounds maybe counterintuitive initially. The reason for that is, so everything in cryopreservation storage is always optimized for the most secure, like maximum security. Now, the upside down logic comes from the fact that if for whatever reason, and I don't think the probability of that is high in Switzerland, but if for whatever reason there's some geopolitical problems where liquid nitrogen supplies are not available anymore, then this liquid nitrogen would boil off. And then after a while, the body might not be fully covered with liquid nitrogen anymore, right? And if for whatever reason the geopolitical problems continue, you want to make sure that the brain gets cooled the longest. So again, it's just for the low probability eventuality that somehow liquid nitrogen is not available anymore. You can make sure that you have the best possible preservation.
This just makes me interested. This shouldn't have been maybe intuitive from the beginning, right? That you should actually place people upside down in case of some geopolitical crisis. It seems like this has been an evolving field where you kind of realize these things as you go on. So is there a story behind when people started, when cryonics companies started placing people upside down?
Yeah, that was before my time. I'm not exactly sure when that started out, but like from a fundamental logic, so cryopreservation organizations think a lot about stuff, like what could be the eventuality in the eventuality. Like, what is another step of what could we make sure is safe, and so on. So that, if that as much as you humanly can, all eventualities and all potential problems are mitigated.
And I think that one of the questions folks might have is, how can I be sure that you actually survive as a company? There have been failures before, right? Where people actually have been thawed because the company got in financial trouble or whatever. How have you been thinking about this to minimize that risk?
Yeah, the important word here is company. So in fact, companies have gone out of business, not recently. This was also many, many, many decades ago. But nevertheless, companies are not good at doing long-term cryopreservation storage. In our case, it is not a company. It's a non-profit foundation in Switzerland. From everything, how they're set up, how their governance works, and so on, foundations are significantly better set up to make sure the same mission is being adhered to, even if it's 100 years into the future. So I would definitely strongly advise to not be long-term stored at any company. That should always be foundations.
Are there any um, risks involved that you can foresee, even if you are a non-profit foundation?
Yeah, there's a lot. Like, how does governance works, making sure that the board stays mission aligned, right? That the board doesn't have any financial incentives of keeping someone on cryopreservation or not keeping them in cryopreservation, and so on. From like geopolitical problems, right? One reason we're in Switzerland is because Switzerland is a very, very stable country. So there's a long list of things where you can, where you can put some thought into and make sure that potential problems would be, mitigated as much as possible.
I was thinking, so if Peter, let's say he has a currently incurable cancer, and then you take care of him, then let's say he's 80. Peter, I don't think you would like to be resuscitated just because they can cure the cancer, right? You would want them to resuscitate you, or I mean, uh, or get you into a live operating mode when they have also cured aging, right? So is there like a specific directive, Peter, that you would give to Emil for when the conditions are met for you to want to come back?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. I don't think I have thought about it in that way, because I think that if we reach the technology where I can be resuscitated, it should follow that we have already solved the other problems, because it seems like a
And
much,
that would
much
indeed,
harder problem to solve.
yeah. So from our side, there's three fundamental directives, right? You need to be able to do reverse the cryopreservation procedure, right? Of course, that's a prerequisite. Second point is you need to be able to cure the underlying disease that killed the person in the first place. And last but not least, the person, when they're being brought back, needs to have a relevant amount of years of life left. So you wouldn't bring someone back who's 85 who then dies at 86 again due to some other disease, right? So, and that's on the foundation side. Now, if an individual who signs up with us decides or says, "Hey, listen, I would like to add some, wish," then they can provide wishes that the foundation tries to adhere to as much as possible.
Yeah, so I was wondering, I want to go back to the preservation again. What do we know about uh, because the most important organ to preserve here is of course the brain. Otherwise we wouldn't be doing this. If we
Yeah,
could preserve all the other organs perfectly but not the brain, it wouldn't be much point, right?
sure.
But
No.
still, there's as you alluded to before, there's a lot of things we don't know about how the brain works. what are the what do we know about actually resuscitating people with intact identity, memories, and so on? And what are the unknowns here?
Yeah. So what the unknown unknowns are, I don't know because they're unknown. Like, very tough to
What are
say.
the known
Um,
unknowns then?
right, right. So as much as we understand, like everything that we value, right? And of course, I'm not speaking to people who have some metaphysical or religious beliefs, right? Like that is always, of course, not covered. But apart from that, as much as we understand everything we value, meaning consciousness, identity, personality, memories, comes from the connections in the brain, those weights of those connections, and kind of like an internal computation of the cell. Like all these quantum theory of consciousness and so on, to my understanding, is not greatly supported. So these parts are being kept around in cryopreservation. Now, it is possible that it turns out down the line that there's another part that is not being kept around, and then the cryopreservation procedure would need to be adapted. Yeah, as much as we currently can say, can we prove that? No, we cannot prove that yet. We can kind of, from the fact that, as I said before, that you can train memories into C. elegans, and they have a neural structure as well. At least it gives us a hint that this might be the case, but it's not yet proof. To be fair, I'm pretty sure if someone wants proof, then this topic is not for them, right? Like cryopreservation currently, and probably for the next decades, relies on making an educated guess and taking a chance, right? I think like you will probably, I'm not sure if you will be able to prove that before you bring someone back from cryopreservation, right? But I think, as much as we understand currently, I think it is a good guess.
There was something you also mentioned in the paper I've been referring to now, that should we only go forward if we could prove something, or should we go forward with an educated guess? And you came down on the educated guess path.
Yeah, I mean, we go forward with educated guess every day of the week,
Yeah.
right? Like that's how, and every type of research pretty much works, right? Like once you have proof, for argument's sake, it might not be research anymore, right? And it's now an accepted fact, kind of. So and and to maybe on another level, we should definitely, I think, at least we should give people the right to go forward without proof if the alternative is cremation, right, or burial. If we stay within the realm of medical decision making.
Yeah. Before we get into the resuscitating and thawing technology that might be needed, or
Can
that
I
will be
jump in? Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
Emil, you wouldn't say resuscitation, right? Because they are not dead, right?
No, I think like resuscitation basically just means restarting the heart,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Okay,
And so on, right? Like so like all these words. So I know that there's sometimes a discussion: are people in cryopreservation, should we consider them dead? And I think we should consider them dead. We should just not consider them irrecoverably dead. I think because like what's the alive part here? Like, for everything, every definition of the word alive, that does not happen in people who are cryopreserved. There's no metabolic activity. There's nothing going on. So what's the alive part here? But we should not consider them irrecoverably dead, and we should assign a high moral weight to people that are not irrecoverably dead. So at least that's how I think about it.
Is that a discussion you have inside the cryo community?
I'm not sure. I've heard like parts of maybe where this is like tangentially being discussed, but I have not participated much in that discussion. For me, these two things are the same. The reason why I'm not saying these people are alive for all intents and purposes is because if you would say that, right? I mean, my part of my job is making this topic more mainstream. Everybody mainstream person, if I'm saying someone in cryopreservation is alive, they're like, what are you talking about? Right? It just makes it significantly more difficult to get someone into it. Like, it's much easier to say, listen, they are dead right now, but there might not be irrecoverable death. And here's some examples, as I brought up before with CPR and so on, how exactly that same situation happened in the past. Plus, if we would talk about people like, I know that sometimes there's this discussion of should they have somehow rights like people who are in cryopreservation. I think this is challenging the current legal system too much. It's just too much of an ask right now to try to get in that direction. I think it's much easier to say these people are they're not irrecoverably dead, and due to that reason, we should assign high moral weight to them.
So, but I think you say bring back, right? Is that the way you like to put it?
I think unfortunately, there's no good word for that. Yes, resuscitate, bring back, revive, reanimate. I think all of these words are not great. All of these words are somehow correct.
Patrick, can I ask you, because it sounded like you were you felt a little bit bad about Emil's skepticism to us solving this problem before in our lifetimes. So, how do you feel about cryopreservation? How do you think about that yourself?
Well, I think it's obviously much better than the alternative, and so it's definitely a very reasonable bet. Of course, I think that if you're from the outside and you're looking at those who are doing research into anti-aging and you hear the buzz and the optimism, but then you see that some of the people who know the most about this area are telling Emil that I'm only going to work this much longer on it and then I'm going to switch to cryo to go for the lifeboat, or so to speak. That is a bit disconcerting, I think.
Mm. But would you want to cryopreserve yourself?
Yes.
I don't think we have.
That's all. Like,
I don't think me and Patrick has really talked about this. Everyone knows that I'm going to do it because I've been outspoken about it. But yeah, I think that the reason why I ask you and I do it in this setting is we've asked researchers before, and some of them don't want to talk about this openly. And I think that's a shame. I do know, I realize that this is very intimate and private and so on, but I think that would also be a good thing if more people actually talked about this openly to get rid of, if there is some taboo around it, we should actively try to mitigate that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is what we're doing here at this podcast. We're trying to remove the taboo of wanting to live longer.
I think that Ralph Merkel said that. I actually read this in Jose Cordeiro's book. He wrote a book called The Death of Death, and I read his passage on cryonics, and I think he has a quote from Ralph Merkel, where he says that cryonics is an experiment. So, do you want to be in the experiment group or in the control group?
Right.
It's funny.
No, absolutely. And I think this is honestly how you should think about it, right? You should think so I want people to sign up for cryopreservation because they say it's just at the minimum it's better than cremation, right? And I value my life enough so that I say, well, I put the money down. And if someone says I value other things more, then that's totally fine as well. But I think that's the best way to think about it. And now I'm going to spend my time and take any support I can get to make it, to increase the probability as much as possible until, well, probably I'm cryopreserved. I mean, I'm of course signed up, and I like currently, like I'm just saying that there's a low probability that I might make the cutoff of taking some longevity pill, but I think this is very unlikely. So I currently, I think cryopreservation is on the horizon, and I'm just trying to make it as good as possible from a quality standpoint and from a security and safety.
But on the other hand, like, how popular can it be? I mean, can you have 100 million people in cryo tanks? I mean, isn't that just impossible?
Yeah, no, 100 million is still possible. If you're talking billions, okay, at some point I'm going to say it's going to be a bit difficult. But 100 million, right? So let's think about it, right? 100 million is less than 1% extra people in the future, right? We're going to level to at 13 billion about, right? And 100 million is less than 1% extra people. So that should not be too much of an issue. Humans are pretty small from a like cryopreservation at scale, right? It's a volume question, right? Um, Humans are, they are 100 liters. Like it's not fully true, of course, but like they're pretty small. 100 million. I have not calculated 100 million how much space that would actually take, but it is probably still possible. And then liquid nitrogen is generated with energy, and you would probably need a good amount of energy. I also have not calculated that, but at some point we're getting fusion reactors. I'm not. Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 20. I don't know. But at some point we're going to have fusion reactors, and probably at that point, 100 million people in cryostasis would not be an unimaginable thing. I'm already happy if I have 100K people in cryopreservation, right? So we're not realistically talking about anything close to 100 million, right? We need to remember currently 500 to 600 people worldwide are in cryopreservation, right? So if I do my job really really well and 1 million people just signs up, that would already be a home run result.
But do you get this argument that this is just for the wealthy and it can never scale for the common person, etc.?
Yeah, so I do get that argument, and I think so. There is an argument in there, and I think the argument is that every organization should so cryopreservation should be something that everybody can afford. But that does not mean you should not work on it if that is not yet the case, right? I mean, every medical treatment initially started out as something that not everybody can afford, right? Um, I understand why a statutory healthcare system currently would say, well, we definitely don't want to offer cryopreservation while we have other problems as society. That part I understand. But as long as we as a Western society agree that it is permissible for someone to say, I've been diagnosed with cancer, now I take all my money and travel through the world and find the best doctors and whatever treatment and whatever thing I can do, right? As long as we allow that, then I think it's totally fine as well if someone says, well, I'm putting 200,000 euros of my own money into cryopreservation. But from an organizational standpoint, I think organizations that work on cryopreservation or offer cryopreservation have some degree of moral obligation to try to make cryopreservation affordable to everybody. So that it should never be something where someone says, I want to be cryopreserved, but I cannot afford it.
Okay, so let's talk about thawing and reanimating or resuscitating or just being alive again. What's the uh, what's the best understanding of how to do that? And maybe we could also here it would be maybe a good idea to discuss the company that Laura Deming and others have started around this. They have some ideas, I think. So what's your understanding of this and how we should proceed with it?
Yes, so everything I say regarding revival of humans, of course, is highly speculative. Who knows, right? I think the best mental picture is waking up from general anesthesia. There was a time where you don't have any memories, you didn't have any consciousness, you were just gone. You remember the time before. The time in general anesthesia or in cryopreservation just does not exist in your personal view. And then you wake up, right? So most likely when you come back from cryopreservation, you just open your eyes and says, the last thing you remember is whatever, 50, 100, however many years it might be ago, that you were just in a hospital. And whatever the last thing you remember is. And then, of course, all the diseases would have already been cured during the procedure. And then the foundation, part of what the foundation does is there to do kind of reintegration into a future society. So they would be then tasked to make sure that you understand what's going on, that you have, you're being given the necessary knowledge and skills that you might need to succeed in a future society.
Yeah. And so let's say you're going to revive me. What's your best understanding of how to do that? The day has come, and you're going to do the procedure.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a book called Cryostasis Revival, which is like 600 or 700 pages of very it's not an
Is
easy
that
read.
Robert Freitas?
Um, yeah, that's Robert Freyer's book. Very good, good, very comprehensive. How that might work, right? So, long story short, right? And again, I'm summarizing 600 or whatever pages in a few sentences. So go read the book. So how that would work tentatively is now you would be at extremely low temperatures, right? So at these temperatures, you can't really do anything. So you would need to start warming up a bit, probably. Then, like the at least that type of revival relies on a lot of nanotechnology. You would tunnel out all the vessels so that you get access to stuff. And then with different types of nanobots, you would stabilize, repair on a cellular or subcellular level what damage there might be, if there is any. And in current cryopreservation, at least on an average preservation, there is a relevant amount of damage. So you would repair that during the revival process. You would fix whatever the underlying condition is, let it be the cancer again or whatever killed the person. And what we call aging right now, you would fix that as well. So misfolded proteins, um, uh, glycosylation end products that are not that you can't break down. You would do that. You would break them down and pretty much make the body young again. And then once you have done a good amount of that part, you warm up very fast, or you suppress ice crystal formation during warm up. And at some point, you just, in quotation marks, just you restart the heart, even though that might in fact be the easy part. And then the cells would start metabolism again, right? So the brain cells would get oxygen again, they would start metabolism again. And then probably the brain and consciousness and whatever would just snap back into activity, just like it does after resuscitation from having had no heartbeat for. I mean, I'm of course simplifying a lot, but kind of that direction. And then at some point, the person would have consciousness again.
What about the company that Laura Deming started? How is that? What's your knowledge about them and how they're going to help this cause?
Yeah, so currently everybody helps the cause who gets involved in
Yeah.
that space, right? I mean, it's a research company, right? So they're not really doing cryopreservation procedures. Um, I'm fully supportive of everybody who gets into gets into that space. Um, like they're a bit tight-lipped on what they work on, so I'm not 100% sure what exactly their research pathway is. I have like a high-level understanding, but I'm not sure if this is if I think this is not public, and I think she said it in confidence.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if I can say right now. No, but it makes a lot of sense that people get into this space. I mean, they recently published a roadmap, right? So there's of course information on what they want to do. The first roadmap steps, to be fair, they're not really that exciting. Like a lot of the stuff has already been done. And when they published their first results, like a couple of there was a bit of contention in the community if this is new or not. And I'm leaning on the side that this is not really something super new. But their down the line milestones are they're pretty challenging, I think. So if they would achieve that, then kudos to them. It would be a great advance in the space.
And okay, so I'm now alive again after several years. We don't know if it's been decades or centuries or even millennia. Let's say it has been quite some time and that society is not really similar to what I was living in when I died. You mentioned something about having a like a team or something for reintroduction. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of three outcomes how that might go, right? And they're depending a bit on how far in the future we are, right? So I think there's three potential futures. One, let's say for whatever reason it goes faster than we think, and society, yes, there's going to be iPhone, like whatever number, right? But it's still an iPhone, right? You still understand the concept of the iPhone, right? In that case, so the foundation would not say, of course, here's the door, now figure it out, but there would be a slow reintegration process. Now, it's possible that that does not require that much, and it's relatively easy. It's also possible that that requires a lot, right? If it requires a lot, there would probably be a time when, let's say you died, well, hopefully not anytime soon. Let's say you died 2070 or whatever, right? And at that point, society looks however it looks, and then you revived 100 years later, then probably the reintegration process would be an accelerated reintroduction of how society works, right? So the first room, and of course, again, I'm like speculating, and this is like movie territory, how this might look. The first room might look like 2070. It's everything, you know, everything you remember, you see whatever the table looks like, the table you remembered from when you died, right? And then the next room, and again, I'm just making this kind of like visualize it, might have new technology that you still kind of recognize, but it's like new stuff. You know, think of a car and a flying car. You know, people who have never seen a flying car, they still can imagine a flying car, right? You know, hundreds of years ago, people imagined flying cars because it looks like a car. So kind of like that. So I think in these two cases, as long as basic human interactions are the same, like of course, if we're not video chatting here, if we're sitting, you know, normally I talk to people about these topics, like these philosophical approaches over dinner, right? And then usually what I say, if you know, if everybody keeps their mobile in their pocket, the interaction at a dinner table right now is the same interaction as it was 100 years ago, as it was 200 years ago. Even the topics in most cases are similar to the same, like what happened at work, what happens at home, what are your goals for next year, how's the weather, and so on, right? So as long as these fundamental interactions are the same, I think there's a good chance that people can catch up. Maybe not 100%, but at least a good amount. And now, again, highly speculative, there is this potential that the future has progressed so much that, you know, we're talking science fiction level, that everything is so fundamentally different that there's no realistic way of catching up. Now, I think that that society would probably be post-scarcity. So, you know, material things are not a big issue anymore. And I assume that a future society, just if I look back, every society as it progresses has gotten more social, meaning it has assigned more moral value to more humans, to humans from other races, from other countries, to animals, and so on. So I assume that a future society would assign high moral value to humans that come from the past as well. And now, if it is determined that these humans have pretty much no chance of catching up anytime soon, there could be the solution of just having, you know, taking one part of Earth, make it look like 2070, and just let the 2070 humans live in that part, and then very, very, very slowly, over maybe decades or even centuries, introduce them to new technology, let them catch up. But basically having this, it might, I don't know, like let it be 50 years, right? A very slow introduction to however, in quotation marks, the real world looks now, right? So I think that the likelihood that you're waking up in some dystopian future is negligible to none. If there's a dystopian future, you're not going to wake up, right? They're not going to care about the humans from long time ago. Yeah, so that's kind of like, and again, we're deep in science fiction and speculation territory for all of that, but I think that's the most likely case how it might work.
Yeah, speaking about the science fiction territory, and I know that, of course, I think you're right that we're probably in a post-scarcity world. Um, if we're talking about very long time frames here. But you know, I mentioned this to you at the retreat in Sweden. My fear of waking up and I'm somehow in a much worse state than I was when I died. And by that I mean worst state that I'm no longer in control of my destiny. So maybe I'm my mind has been uploaded to a computer, and I'm actually not in control of my mind anymore. So there could be, for example, I could not die anymore. I'm really immortal. So I'm thinking about, like suffering on very long time scales and so on. And I know that you have that was not the first time you got that question. And what's your response to these kinds of really crazy things that you can imagine, even if
Right.
they're so
Right.
unlikely?
Yeah. So I think that the key point here is really it's super unlikely, but is not impossible. But then again, so I know one person who says I'm not signing up because of indefinite torture. The probability of indefinite torture, that which I personally value as very negative, and that's why in my personal calculation I'm not doing it. I think if we're at that level of thought experiment, then you being alive right now and doing cryopreservation or not cryopreservation changes the probability of being indefinitely tortured only negligibly, right? Because if we're in a world that somehow or some super AI for whatever reason wants to indefinitely torture you, I mean, it could probably, I mean, we're going deep into, like let's say there's a deterministic universe, right? And it could back calculate your atoms at exactly the right positions, right? And then still indefinitely torture you if it wants to. So I think if we're at that level of thought experiment, then the I think there's no relevant difference between you choosing cryopreservation or not. There might be some. There is some still negligible percentage increase probably that signs you up for indefinite torture if you choose cryopreservation. But um, now we're at like 3 glasses of wine thought experiment level, and I think for me this is not something that I feel like has any tangible, like the point basically being, right. I think there's pretty good evidence of non-existence after, well, there's at least no good evidence for existence after death, which I'm signed up for. So I'm willing to have the small amount of off chance probability of indefinite torture to avoid infinite non-existence,
Patrick, you're the philosopher.
or potentially invent.
Yeah, I mean, there is a discussion about this in political science too, whether you think one should aim at minimizing the probability of catastrophic outcomes or not, if that's rational or not. And people have just different evaluations of this.
Yeah. I mean, there's this, what is it called? Counterfactual mugging or something like that. There is like these thought experiments, right? Where if I'm just saying, like, how does the thought experiment go? If I tell you, um, if you don't give me 10 euros right now, I'm destroying the world. Sure, it's going to be a small probability that you're going to believe me, but since the negative consequences are so tremendously high, you should probably give me 10 euros. Um, which at some point, we're deep in some theoretical territory, which I don't think is then that relevant to implement anymore.
And I have to
Yeah,
say also, Emil, that if I'm thinking about living for an indefinite amount of time, these thoughts don't arise. Like if you said to me, we're going to solve aging tomorrow, and that's it, problem solved. You don't need to be cryopreserved. I wouldn't I
I
wouldn't
think
I wouldn't then say, oh, that's terrible. That's because now the risk of me being tortured for an indefinite amount of time has been
goes
raised.
up.
But if I'm thinking about
Yeah,
cryopreservation, there's something about that feeling of a lot of time that goes by, and
yeah.
I'm not aware of them, right?
I think that's like I think it's that fact that you have loss of control for a relevant amount of
Yeah.
time, right? Where it's this gut reaction of that. That's not something that I feel super comfortable with, right? It's not something I like. I mean, technically you have that every night, right? Like every night you go to bed and you might wake up next day in indefinite torture scenario,
Yeah.
right? But of course, this is priced in. You do this every day, so it's like you have gotten accustomed to it. Whereas cryopreservation is something that people have not been accustomed to, so they feel, from a gut reaction standpoint, they like that less. Yeah.
So how does your day to day, what does it look like now? What are you most preoccupied with this year, and what is the most important thing for tomorrow, next year?
Yeah, so we always have these kind of three big areas of what we're doing, and then a couple more, like, short-term things. One is growth, right? Presenting this topic in ways where more people can think about it and then make an informed decision if they want to do it. Second would be increasing the capabilities, the medical capabilities, our logistical capabilities, our coverage, so that if something happens to someone, we have a team close by. And last but not least, pushing research forward to, in the long term, improve cryopreservation fundamentally. And then for this year, we're launching in the US right now. So this is one big topic, definitely. We already launched in a soft launch kind of perspective, and now we'll do a full launch early next year. We're raising some more more funding for the company, not because we really need funding for the company. Like, the company is well financed for the next like a good amount of time, but we're trying to run this company with a lot of downside protection, right? Like, for whatever reason, if times get tough, then we want to make sure that this company is always safe and sound. Yeah, so these are, I think, the kind of the long term and the shorter term topics.
You launched in the US. There's already Alcor in the US, and also the Cryonics Institute, I believe. Why did you want to go to the US, where there's competition already?
Yeah, so the competition, so competition in this field is not really a big issue, right? So, I mean, Alco has, I don't know, 1,500 people signed up. Cryonics Institute has 1,500 people signed up, right? Um, we're still smaller. We have like 600 to 700 right now, but we only took like a couple of years, whereas they took 50 to get there, right? We're growing 10x faster than them right now, but not because we want to take their members. No, we want to communicate the topic in a way where new people who have never considered it or have never signed up say, now I'll do it, right? So, competition or not, it's a country with 300 million, right? It's not relevant that they have a couple of members. At the same time, the US is an easy, it's the logical choice for us to expand into. First of all, we know the country much better, right? We speak the language better. Culturally, it's closer, and so on and so on. Then, as opposed to saying we're doing the Middle East or Asia or whatever, right? So, from that point of view, it does make sense. Yeah, and the other reason is, like, there's still a lot to improve. Like US doesn't have many standby teams. We, funny enough, have now the most locations of teams, which is yeah, surprising or whatever. Nevertheless, yeah, I think it's mostly figuring out how to make this topic palatable and interesting to more people, as opposed to somehow competing against the others. So, we like, there's a lot of collaboration that we have with them, or like, well, not yet, but they're sometimes a bit slow on making these decisions. But we would love to do things together.
I think that one of the first things when I first encountered Tomorrow was that uh, this looked more inviting and still credible, or maybe even more credible than the alternatives, and more inviting. I think that just the way that you have tried to communicate, uh, both with words and visually and so on, has made a difference. Is that something
Yeah,
you
it's definitely something.
can see as well?
Yeah, it's definitely something. Yeah, absolutely, it's definitely something. So we're trying to communicate. So I think the big difference in the past was, if you signed up for cryopreservation, you needed to be a cryonaut, whatever the cryonicist. Like now it is your personality.
Right.
I'm exaggerating a bit, but maybe not too much even. Now it is your personality that you are involved in that cryopreservation thing. So we try to move this field into, you do whatever you want to do, but and you might, like, whatever, you're a doctor, you're a computer scientist, it does not matter. You just think if I die tomorrow, I'd rather be cryopreservation. But there's no that you don't need to sign up to a larger framework of thought or whatever. It's just something that you do. And I think we're going into a bit into that direction and trying to communicate the topic in a way where it is acceptable to a larger audience, and then make sure that people, are just saying, hey, this makes sense to me, and then it's easy to sign up. It's easy. It's not a hassle, and so on.
How many people do you have cryopreserved now?
So all in, we're somewhere between. The official number is going to be released early next year. So last year, so it's always on the foundation side they release that. Last year we had 4. We're now in good double digits.
Okay. And how many members do you have?
Somewhere between 600 and 700.
Yeah. And you said that you were growing fast, or faster than the.
Not fast. I would like to grow much faster, but it's still I think somewhere between 5 and 10 times faster than any other organization. Like, with us, like 20 people per month about sign up, sometimes 30, sometimes it's a bit lower, like somewhere in ballpark. And I think the other organizations usually add like a couple per day, per month.
I was going to ask, are there any governments that are friendly to this, or interested or supportive?
They're not like I think our governments are not yet interested, because why would they be, right? It's like 20 people a year do it. Like what's the government like? Like for them, I think, as long as there's freedom of science and you decide what happens to your body after death, they're not against it either. But to be fair, also we don't super seek them out, because I talked to some members of parliament in Germany, and they asked me, like, what can we help something? And I don't even know what I want to ask for, right? Because the things I would ask for they're not realistic, like for them to push that through. And otherwise, I don't have any problems, right? Like, so you can do cryopreservations, everything is fine. So and to be fair, I understand why they don't really have positions on that, because why would they?
Can you say something about? You mentioned that maybe this shouldn't be a part of your whole personality to have a cryo contract and so on, but
I mean, it can be.
Sure,
Like,
sure. But can you
yeah.
say something about? Are there mostly males doing this, or are they in a certain age group then when they sign up, or do you see some trends there?
Yeah, so it's more male customers, right, or members. Somewhere, I'm not exactly sure what it is. Might be 70-30, somewhere in that ballpark. It's usually people between 35 and 45. This is the typical sign up age. Usually people are super healthy, right? It's not people who are like dying right now, who is the majority of people sign up. It's just people who say, hey, this makes sense to me, and if something happens to me, then I want to have a cryopreservation contract. And it is usually people that, in the broadest sense of the word, have something to do with technology. Like, I don't know, engineers, computer scientists, of course, but in the broadest sense of the word. This is kind of the standard in quotation marks person who signs up.
Yeah, something about the demographic. So more males, but what about religiosity?
Almost all atheist and agnostic. There's a very small percentage of people who are religious, and then I remember asking one person who, why, like, because religion, technically, that value proposition is already figured out, right? Why do they need a cryopreservation contract? And the person said, if I'm on earth longer, I can do more good for God. So I was like, yeah, that makes sense in my logic. Like, at least I understand that argument, but it's like 99.9% atheist and agnostic.
You know, it's interesting that the big survey of the Pew Research Center actually, I think it was like 1% more religiously affiliated people wanted also radical life extension than the general public.
Oh, really? Interesting. Interesting. Oh, I was not aware of that. Yeah. To be fair, 1% is probably within margin of error. So
Absolutely.
apparently, like religiousness doesn't do anything. Apparently, then.
Absolutely, but
Yeah.
it's still surprising.
Yeah. Yeah.
We talked about me as an example before, going through the whole process, right? But you say that you actually have like double-digit numbers now of people being cryopreserved. How has your experience been from these kinds of cryopreservation that you've already done? Eh, are they, as they say, most of them have been planned, some have been less planned?
Um, so some of them are because we took over cryopreserved patients from other organizations that felt our organization is more safe and sound. So we took over. Um, the ones that we've done, and we do a lot of additional trainings cases as well. I don't think there's anything like super big where I felt like this was like super surprising. There's always like surprising stuff, and like it's a relatively complex thing and a lot of logistically moving parts and so on. Um, all of them, yes, all of them knew that they're going to die. So there was none of these last minute things. So it's kind of this double step process, right? You know that you're going to die, but you don't know when exactly you're going to die. So that brings some additional complexity. But it was none of those cases where someone calls us up and says, "Oh my God, this person has died without any prior knowledge about it." Yeah, there was. Oh, sorry, that's actually not 100% true. There was one case where someone died, and then in fact was not cryopreserved in the end. Someone who the problem is, so there is this tendency of people who. So it's highly important to phrase it that way, to to do the whole thing, put funding in place, put everything in place. Sometimes there's this tendency of sign up and yeah, funding I do in the future or whatever, right? Which statistically, of course, is true, that you could theoretically do that in the future. But every case that I'm aware of, not only from us but also from other organizations, where people have done that, people sometimes die and then they're not cryopreserved because not every document and every required thing is in place. So that's one, and that we had one case. I actually don't know if it was this year or last year. It might have been last year, but this does happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you also mentioned that the LBF retreat that there could be cases where the funding is dependent on the next of kin, right? And they might not.
Yeah, definitely don't do this. Highly. No, because the thing is, next of kin, they go through these stages of grief, right? Where initially they're very interested, but then 2 days later they're like, and as crazy as this sounds, they're making, they're accepting the death, right? Where suddenly cryopreservation is not, doesn't sound necessary anymore to them. So strongly advise against relying on next of kin for funding cryopreservation contracts.
Emil, I think we've really covered a lot of it, I feel.
I think we did. Yeah. No, absolutely. Sometimes I also have podcasts with 15 minutes where I need to summarize, or not, or 25 minutes. So I'm used to also being able to present this topic in shorter. But no, I think we covered it pretty comprehensively from A to Z.
Yeah.
And of course, if there's anybody in the audience who would like to talk more about it, they can always reach out, and I'm more than happy to chat about individual questions.
Yeah. So perfect, Emil. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. It's so fascinating, and hopefully viewers and listeners know a lot more now about how they should think about this. And hopefully you would like to come back in the future, and we can do an update and see what has happened since then.
No, I'd be happy to. And thank you so much for inviting me. It was great.